At Sunday service, my granddaughter pushed me to the back pew and said, "You ruin everything with that funeral face. That's why Grandpa left you." I stayed silent, but at the end of the service, I asked the pastor for permission and took the microphone. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. And subscribe for more beautiful stories." I never thought my own flesh and blood would be the one to break me. Not after everything I'd already endured. That Sunday morning started like any other. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., my old bones aching as I carefully made my bed, a habit from 50 years of marriage that I couldn't shake, even 5 years after Thomas left. I laid out my best dress, navy blue with small white flowers, modest and proper for church. My silver hair was pinned neatly in a bun, and I applied just a touch of lipstick. Looking in the mirror, I saw the lines time had carved into my face, each one telling its own story of silent suffering. The church had been my sanctuary for decades, the one place where I felt peace, where I could pretend everything was all right. Even after Thomas abandoned me for his secretary, 30 years my junior, I held my head high at New Hope Baptist. Nobody needed to know the details. Nobody needed to hear how he'd called me useless and dried up on his way out the door. My son James was waiting outside in his SUV when I stepped onto my porch. He never came inside anymore, always in a hurry, always impatient. "Morning, Mum," he said, barely looking up from his phone. As I climbed into the passenger seat, his wife Patricia was in the back with their daughter, my 17-year-old granddaughter Celine. "Good morning, dears," I said, turning to smile at them. Patricia gave a tight-lipped nod, while Celine didn't even look up from her phone. The drive to church was silent, except for the radio playing softly. I used to bake cinnamon rolls every Sunday morning. We'd eat them warm from the oven before church, the kitchen filled with laughter and sticky fingers. Now, James didn't even accept a cup of coffee when he picked me up. When we arrived at the church, Patricia and Celine hurried ahead, while James walked alongside me. Not with me, just beside me. "There's a difference. Can you try to hurry it up a bit, Mum?" he muttered. "We're always the last ones to get seated because you move so slow." I quickened my pace as much as my arthritic knees would allow, feeling the familiar sting of tears threatening. I pushed them back. Blanche Watson doesn't cry in public. Never has. Never will. As we approached the entrance, I spotted my friend Martha waving at me. "I'll save you a seat," she called out before I could respond. Celine appeared in front of me, her face twisted with annoyance. "Grandma, we're sitting with the Millers today. Dad's trying to get Mr. Miller to invest in his business," she hissed, "so you'll have to sit somewhere else." "Oh," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "That's fine, dear. I'll sit with Martha." "And try not to talk to everyone on your way in," she added. "You always make us late with your endless conversations." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, dear." We walked into the sanctuary, the morning light streaming through the stained glass windows, casting colourful patterns on the worn wooden pews. James spotted the Millers and waved, guiding Patricia toward them. I started to follow, but Celine turned suddenly. "What are you doing?" she whispered harshly. "I thought I was going to sit with you," I stammered. She rolled her eyes dramatically. "I just told you, we're sitting with the Millers." "There's no room." There were empty spaces on the pew. Plenty of room. But before I could say anything, Celine placed her hand on my shoulder and firmly pushed me toward the back. "Just go sit in the back with the other old people," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "You always hold everything up with that depressing expression anyway. That's probably why Grandpa left you." The world stopped right there in the middle of the church aisle, with the organ playing softly and people finding their seats around us. The weight of her words crushed the air from my lungs. I stood frozen, feeling dozens of eyes on me, some pitying, some curious, some deliberately looking away in embarrassment. James and Patricia pretended not to hear. Already engaged in animated conversation with the Millers, Martha appeared at my side, her warm hand on my elbow. "Come sit with me, Blanche," she whispered, guiding me to a pew near the middle. I followed mechanically, my body moving while my mind replayed Celine's words over and over. Throughout the service, I couldn't focus on Pastor Roberts's sermon about forgiveness and truth. The irony wasn't lost on me. All these years I'd forgiven, I'd stayed silent. I'd protected everyone but myself. When the collection plate came around, I placed my usual envelope inside. 10% of my small pension, faithfully given every week. As the plate moved on, something inside me shifted. All these years I'd given to my husband, to my son, to this church. And what had I kept for myself? Nothing. Not even my dignity. As Pastor Roberts finished his sermon and asked if anyone had announcements or prayer requests, I felt myself standing up. My legs moved of their own accord, carrying me toward the front of the church. I heard Martha's confused whisper behind me, but I kept walking. "Excuse me, Pastor Roberts," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "May I say something to the congregation?" Pastor Roberts looked surprised, but nodded, stepping aside from the pulpit. "Certainly, Sister Blanche." As I took his place, I saw James's face drain of color, Patricia's eyes widen in horror, and Celine, my granddaughter who had pushed me away not 30 minutes earlier, freeze mid-eye roll. I gripped the sides of the wooden pulpit, feeling the strength of my 70 years flow through me. My voice, silenced for decades, was about to be heard. "Good morning, brothers and sisters in Christ," I began. "Today I want to talk to you about truth, about silence, and about what happens when we confuse one for the other." My hands trembled slightly as I stood at the pulpit, but my voice remained steady. The congregation sat in stunned silence. This wasn't like me. Blanche Watson, the quiet widow who sat in the middle pews, who brought homemade bread to potlucks, who never caused a fuss. Yet here I was, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Many of you have known me for years," I continued, "but none of you truly know me. You see, for most of my life, I've been living a lie, or rather, allowing others to believe a lie about me." I could see James shifting uncomfortably in his seat, Patricia whispering furiously in his ear, Celine's mouth hung open in shock. Pastor Roberts stood nearby, his expression uncertain but respectful. He'd always been kind to me, especially after Thomas left. 45 years ago, I married Thomas Watson. We stood in this very church and promised to love each other until death parted us. I paused, swallowing hard. But 5 years ago, Thomas decided he'd had enough of me and left, for a woman half my age. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. This wasn't news to most of them, though the details had been kept vague. What they didn't know was everything that came before. What you don't know, what no one knows, is that our marriage was broken long before he walked out the door. My voice wavered slightly, but I pressed on. For 4 decades I endured things no woman should ever have to endure. I looked directly at Celine, whose face had gone pale. My granddaughter just said I drove my husband away with my depressing expression. Let me tell you about this expression. Taking a deep breath, I rolled up the sleeve of my dress, revealing a faint but visible scar that ran from my wrist halfway up my forearm. Gasps echoed through the sanctuary. This scar came from the time Thomas threw me through a glass coffee table when I asked about lipstick on his collar. James was 7 years old. He was upstairs and I told him I had an accident. When he came down and saw the blood, James's face had turned ashen. This was the first time he was hearing this. I had never told him, or anyone. This wasn't the only time. There were broken ribs I claimed came from falls, black guys hidden behind sunglasses, and bruises, so many bruises, that I covered with long sleeves and high collars, even in summer. The church was completely silent now. The only sound, the soft whirring of the ceiling fans overhead. I stayed because that's what women of my generation were taught to do. I stayed to protect my son from knowing the truth about his father. I stayed because Thomas controlled all our money and threatened to leave me with nothing if I ever tried to leave. I shook my head, tears finally breaking free. I stayed because I was afraid, and because I was ashamed. Martha was crying quietly in her seat, her hand covering her mouth in horror. Pastor Roberts had moved closer, his face etched with compassion. When Thomas finally left me for his secretary, after 40 years, he told everyone I was cold, unloving, depressed. He rewrote our history to make himself the victim, and I let him. I kept his secrets even after he was gone. I looked directly at James. Now, your father wasn't the man you thought he was. He wasn't the doting husband who was driven away by your difficult mother. He was a cruel man who hurt me in ways I've never spoken of until today. James was staring at me, his face a mix of disbelief and dawning horror. Patricia had stopped whispering and sat rigid beside him. After Thomas left, I thought at least now I could have a relationship with my family without his shadow hanging over us. But by then, the damage was done. My son had grown up believing his father's narrative about me. He'd married a woman who saw me as the family burden, the depressing old lady who was too much trouble. I turned my gaze to Patricia, whose face flushed red. When Thomas abandoned me, James and Patricia allowed me to keep living in my home. The home I'd made with my own hands for 40 years, but made it clear it was out of obligation, not love. They never asked why I seemed sad or withdrawn. They never questioned Thomas's version of events. Turning back to the congregation, I continued. Every Sunday, I come to worship with my family, only to be treated like an inconvenience. Today, my own granddaughter told me that my face is the reason my husband left, and pushed me to the back pews so I wouldn't embarrass them in front of potential business contacts. Celine's face crumpled in shame, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm not telling you this to embarrass my family or to get your sympathy. I'm telling you because, at 70 years old, I'm finally tired of carrying these secrets. I'm tired of being the villain in a story that was written by my abuser. Pastor Roberts stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. Sister Blanche, thank you for your courage. God sees your pain, and so do we. I nodded gratefully, wiping away tears. For decades, I believed that staying silent was the same as being strong, that protecting others from the ugly truth was my duty as a wife and mother. Today, I realize that my silence has only protected the wrong people. Looking directly at Celine once more, I said softly, "My dear, you don't know me. You don't know why I look sad sometimes, or why certain noises make me jump. You don't know that I still wake up in the middle of the night terrified, even though the man who hurt me is gone. You've been told a story about me that isn't true." I straightened my shoulders, feeling lighter than I had in decades. From this day forward, I'm going to live in truth. If that means I worship alone, so be it. If that means my family chooses Thomas's lies over my truth, I'll accept that too. But I will not be silenced any more. As I stepped away from the pulpit, the church erupted. Some people were crying openly. Others sat in shocked silence. A few older women nodded in understanding. Perhaps they had secrets of their own. Pastor Roberts took the microphone. Let us pray for Sister Blanche and for healing in her family. I returned to my seat beside Martha, who wrapped her arm around my shoulders. I didn't dare look at James, Patricia, or Celine. I had said my piece. What happened next was up to them. As the congregation bowed their heads in prayer, I kept mine high, eyes open. For the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding. I wasn't pretending. I was simply blanched, wounded, but standing. Silenced no more. The service ended in a blur. People approached me, some with tears in their eyes, others with awkward condolences. Most didn't know what to say, and I didn't blame them. What do you say to a woman who has just laid bare decades of abuse and isolation? I watched as James, Patricia, and Celine huddled near the door, deep in conversation. James kept glancing my way, his expression unreadable. I wondered if they would leave without me, forcing me to find another way home. I was prepared for that possibility. I was prepared for anything now. The church emptied slowly, people lingering longer than usual. Some approached me with gentle touches on my shoulder or whispered words of support. Martha stayed by my side, a silent guardian against the stares and whispers. Do you want me to drive you home? She asked quietly, as the last few congregants filed out. I was about to accept when I saw James walking toward me alone. Patricia and Celine had already gone outside. I'll drive Mum home, he said to Martha, his voice strained but determined. Martha looked at me questioningly. I nodded. It's all right, thank you. Martha squeezed my hand and left, pausing to give James a look I couldn't quite interpret. Judgment? Warning? Perhaps both? The church was nearly empty now, just James and me and Pastor Roberts, tidying up at the altar. Why didn't you ever tell me? James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I sighed, suddenly feeling every one of my 70 years. What would it have changed? James, you adored your father. He was hurting you. His voice cracked. All those times you said you fell or bumped into something, you were a child. I interrupted. It wasn't your burden to bear. And when I wasn't a child anymore, when I was a grown man with a family of my own, you still kept his secrets. I looked at my son, really looked at him, his father's height and jawline, but my eyes that now glistened with unshed tears. By then, the lies had become our reality. I said, you had your own image of your father, your own relationship with him. I didn't want to destroy that, even after he left you, even when he turned us against you. I nodded. Even then, some habits are hard to break. James, I protected him for 40 years. It becomes automatic. We sat in silence for a moment. Through the stained glass windows, I could see Patricia pacing in the parking lot, checking her watch. Celine sat in the car, her face hidden behind her long hair. I don't know what to say, James finally admitted. I don't know how to process any of this. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to believe me either. I stood up, gathering my purse. I didn't speak up today for you or for anyone else. I did it for me. As we walked toward the exit, Pastor Roberts approached. Sister Blanche, Brother James, he acknowledged us both with a nod. If either of you would like to talk more about this, my door is always open. Thank you, Pastor, I said sincerely. James said nothing but gave a tight nod. The drive home was silent. Patricia sat in the back seat, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Celine stared out the window, her cheeks stained with dried tears. No one spoke. What was there to say? When we reached my small house, the one Thomas had left me as a generous parting gift after taking most of our savings, James pulled into the driveway but kept the engine running. Well, see you next Sunday, he said mechanically. I looked at him, then back at Patricia and Celine. Will you? No one answered. I meant what I said in church. If you choose not to believe me, if you decide it's easier to keep believing Thomas's version of things, I'll understand. But I won't apologize for finally telling the truth. Patricia cleared her throat. Do you have any proof of any of this? The question stung, but I wasn't surprised. Patricia had always preferred Thomas, had always seen me as the difficult one. Besides the scars on my body, I asked quietly. No, Patricia, abusers rarely leave a paper trail. James winced at the word abuser, as if hearing it applied to his father physically hurt him. There's a box, I said, suddenly remembering. In the attic. I kept some things. Evidence, I suppose you'd call it. I was going to use it if I ever found the courage to leave him. What kind of evidence? James asked. Pictures of injuries, a few hospital reports where I lied about how I got hurt, some journals, I paused, and letters from the other women. Other women. James's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Your father's affairs didn't start with his secretary, James. She was just the one he finally left me for. Celine spoke for the first time since the church. Can we see them? The things in the box? I looked at my granddaughter, her young face twisted with confusion and shame. She needed to know. Perhaps they all did. Yes, I said simply. Come inside for a moment. I thought they might refuse. Patricia looked like she wanted to object, but James was already turning off the engine. One by one, they followed me into the house they rarely entered anymore. The living room was exactly as it had been when Thomas left. The same worn furniture, the same faded curtains. I hadn't changed anything, partly because I couldn't afford to, and partly because some small part of me was still frozen in the life he'd left behind. I'll get the box, I said. It's in the attic. James, would you help me with the ladder? As James pulled down the attic stairs, I could feel Patricia's eyes taking in the house. The water stain on the ceiling that had never been fixed, the outdated kitchen, the general air of gentle decline. Was she seeing it differently now? Not as the home of a depressed old woman who couldn't keep up, but as the prison it had been for so many years. The attic was dusty and hot, even in September. I pointed to a corner where a plain cardboard box sat unmarked among holiday decorations and old suitcases. That one, I said. James retrieved it, holding it as if it might contain something dangerous. In a way, it did. We returned to the living room where Patricia and Celine waited. I placed the box on the coffee table and slowly removed the lid. I haven't looked at these things in years, I admitted. After he left, I thought about throwing it all away, starting fresh, but something stopped me. The first item I removed was a small photo album. I handed it to James, my hands steady despite the emotions churning inside me. This is what your father did to me over the years, I said simply. This is what I hid from you. James opened the album. Patricia and Celine leaned in to see. The first photo showed a much younger me, with a black eye and split lip. The date on the Polaroid read June 15th, 1979. James's 8th birthday. Celine gasped. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. James just stared, turning pages slowly, each one revealing another documented injury, another date that probably corresponded with some happy family memory in his mind. My God, he whispered. Mom, I had no idea. That was the point, I said quietly. No one did. I expected things to change after that Sunday. What I didn't expect was the complete silence that followed. For 3 weeks, my phone didn't ring. James didn't come to pick me up for church. No one from my family called to check if I was alive or dead. It was as if I had vanished from their lives completely. I still went to church, taking the bus that stopped 2 blocks from my house. Martha saved me a seat each Sunday, and other congregation members, many who had barely spoken to me before, now greeted me warmly, some with a knowing look in their eyes. Women, mostly women, who perhaps understood more than they let on. "Have you heard from James?" Martha asked, one Sunday, as we walked out of the service together. I shook my head. "Not a word." She frowned. "That's not right. No matter what they think of your story, you're still his mother." My story. As if what I'd revealed was a tale I'd spun, not the painful reality of my life. But I understood. It was easier for people to think of it that way. Something separate from me, something that could be believed or disbelieved, accepted or rejected. "They need time," I said, "more to convince myself than Martha. It's a lot to process." "Time is one thing, abandonment is another," Martha replied firmly. "Do you want me to call him?" "No," I said quickly. "Please don't. They'll reach out when they're ready. If they're ever ready," a small voice whispered in my mind. That evening, I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. My neighbor across the street, Mr. Henderson, waved as he collected his mail. I waved back, grateful for the simple acknowledgement of my existence. The sound of a car pulling into my driveway startled me for a moment. Hope fluttered in my chest. James? Celine? But the car wasn't familiar. A sleek black sedan I'd never seen before. When the driver's door opened, my heart nearly stopped. Thomas. He looked older, of course. It had been 5 years, but still handsome in that sharp, dangerous way that had first attracted me all those decades ago. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his clothes expensive and crisp. He'd done well for himself after leaving me. "Blanche," he said, his voice that same smooth tenor that could switch from charm to cruelty in an instant. "We need to talk." I didn't invite him inside. Some boundaries once established shouldn't be crossed again. "Say what you came to say, Thomas," I replied, remaining seated on my swing. He climbed the 3 steps to my porch, his movements still agile despite being nearly 75. "James called me. Told me some interesting things you've been saying at church." Of course, James hadn't called me in 3 weeks, but he'd called his father. The betrayal stung more than I cared to admit. "I didn't say anything that wasn't true," I stated firmly. Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. It never had. "Come now, Blanche. We both know you've always had a flair for the dramatic, showing off scars, telling tales about abuse." He shook his head. "It's sad, really. What are you hoping to gain?" "Gain?" I repeated, incredulous. "I'm not trying to gain anything, Thomas. I'm simply done protecting you." He sat down uninvited in the wicker chair beside my swing. "You're hurting our son with these lies. You're confusing our granddaughter. All because you're still bitter that I left you." I felt a familiar feeling rise within me, that mixture of fear, shame, and doubt that had been my constant companion during our marriage. For a moment, I was that young wife again, being told that my perceptions were wrong, that my feelings were invalid, that I was the problem. But I wasn't that woman anymore. "Get off my porch, Thomas," I said, my voice calm but firm. He blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. This is my house, my property, and you are not welcome here." His face darkened. That familiar transformation that had preceded so many painful moments in our marriage. "You ungrateful, be very careful about your next words," I interrupted, surprising even myself with my boldness. "Mr. Henderson across the street has already noticed we have a visitor. He's quite protective of his elderly neighbor who lives alone." Thomas glanced toward the street, where indeed Mr. Henderson was watching us while pretending to trim his hedges. "You've lost your mind," Thomas said, but he stood up. James is right. You're just a bitter old woman making up stories for attention. Is that what he said? The pain in my voice was evident even to my own ears. Tomas's smile returned, cruel and satisfied more or less. He's embarrassed, Blanche. They all are. That little show at church, it's made you the talk of the town. And not in a good way. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself. I don't believe you. Call him yourself. Oh, wait. You can't. Because he's not answering your calls, is he? Thomas chuckled. Face it, Blanche. They've chosen me. They always will. With that parting shot, he descended my porch steps and returned to his expensive car. I watched him drive away, my hands trembling slightly in my lap. That night, I tried calling James for the first time since the revelation at church. As Thomas had predicted, the call went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What was there to say? The next morning, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was Patricia. Please stop trying to contact us. James is very upset by your false accusations against his father. We need space from your drama. False accusations? Drama? The words cut deep, but they weren't surprising. Thomas had always been the master of spinning narratives. Of course he'd convinced them I was lying. I placed my phone on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. Then I did something I'd never done before. I blocked their numbers. All of them. James, Patricia, even Celine. If they wanted space, they could have it, but it would be on my terms, not theirs. For the next 2 months, I lived in a strange limbo. My family had ostracized me completely. Thanksgiving came and went with no invitation. I spent it with Martha and her daughter instead, grateful for their kindness, but achingly aware of the empty spaces where my own family should have been. Christmas loomed on the horizon, promising more of the same isolation. I tried to keep busy, volunteering at the church food bank and attending a weekly Bible study that Pastor Roberts had started. The other women in the group were kind, but I could tell some of them weren't sure what to make of me. Was I a brave truth-teller or a delusional old woman? Their uncertainty was palpable. One bitterly cold evening in mid-December, I returned home from the grocery store to find a small package on my doorstep. No sender information, just my name and address, and handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a silver frame containing a photo I'd never seen before. Me holding baby Celine in the hospital. My face radiant with joy as I gazed at my newborn granddaughter. Tucked into the corner of the frame was a small note. I found this while cleaning my room. I thought you should have it. I'm sorry, Grandma. As tears blurred my vision, I clutched the frame to my chest. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. It wasn't an invitation back into their lives, but it was something. A tiny crack in the wall of silence they had built around me. That night, I placed Celine's photo on my bedside table and slept more peacefully than I had in months. Perhaps all was not lost after all. Winter melted into spring, and with it came a slow thawing in my heart. The small photo from Celine remained my most treasured possession, a reminder that not all bridges had been permanently burned. I hadn't heard anything more from her, or from James or Patricia, but that single gesture had given me a fragile hope I clung to during lonely nights. You seem different today, Martha observed one sunny April morning as we walked home from church together. More peaceful? I smiled, realizing she was right. I think I am. Have you heard from your family? She asked gently. No, I admitted, but I've stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I've stopped holding my breath every time a car drives by my house. Martha nodded approvingly. That's progress, Blanche, real progress. We paused at the corner where our paths would diverge. Martha headed east to her daughter's house for Sunday dinner, while I would continue north to my empty home. Once, this moment would have filled me with dread, the long afternoon stretching ahead with nothing but my thoughts for company. "Would you like to join us for dinner?" Martha offered, as she often did. "Karen always makes too much food." "Thank you, but not today," I replied, surprising us both. "I have some plans of my own." Martha raised an eyebrow. "Oh, nothing exciting," I admitted with a small laugh. "Just some sewing I want to finish. I'm making a quilt." It sounded insignificant, said aloud, but the project had become important to me over the past few months. I was creating something beautiful with my own hands, something that would outlast me, something that represented all the pieces of my broken life, stitched together into something new and whole. "Oh, don't be a stranger," Martha said, giving me a quick hug before heading on her way. When I reached my house, I noticed Mrs. Abernathy from next door struggling with some heavy bags of potting soil for her garden. Without hesitation, I crossed over to help her. "Oh, Blanche, you're a lifesaver," she exclaimed as I took one of the bags. "These seemed lighter at the store." "They always do," I laughed, following her to her backyard, where she had flower beds prepared for planting. "I'm putting in some dahlias and zinnias," she explained, showing me the seed packets. "They should bloom all summer long." I admired her garden plans, remembering how I'd once loved gardening myself. Thomas had criticized my dirt-digging habit, as he called it, saying it made my hands look like a farmhand's. Eventually, I'd given it up, along with so many other small joys. "I used to grow the most beautiful roses," I found myself saying, "red ones that smelled like heaven." Mrs. Abernathy's eyes lit up. "I have the perfect spot for roses, on the south side. Would you help me choose some varieties? I'm hopeless with anything more complicated than marigolds." Before I knew it, I was spending the afternoon in Mrs. Abernathy's garden, my hands in the rich soil, planning where to plant climbing roses and discussing the merits of different mulches. By the time I returned home, my clothes were dirty, my cheeks sun-kissed, and my heart lighter than it had been in years. That evening, as I washed the soil from under my fingernails, I gazed at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who had stood at that church pulpit 5 months ago. Her eyes were clearer, her shoulders straighter. There was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there before. I was changing inside and out. The next day, I did something I'd been contemplating for weeks. I called Alice Henderson, a real estate agent whose number I'd seen on signs around town. "I'd like to sell my house," I told her when she answered. "Oh, are you moving in with family?" she asked pleasantly. "No," I said firmly. "I'm downsizing, looking for somewhere new just for me." It was time. This house held too many ghosts, too many painful memories. Every room contained echoes of Thomas's anger, of my fear, of decades of pretending. I needed, a fresh start. Alice was efficient and kind. Within a week she'd arranged for a home inspector and had taken professional photographs. "It's a solid house in a good neighborhood," she assured me. "It should sell quickly, especially if we price it right." The listing went live on a Monday. By Thursday, I had 3 offers, all above asking price. The housing market was hot, Alice explained, especially for modestly priced homes like mine. I accepted the highest offer. A young couple expecting their first child, who had written a heartfelt letter about wanting to build their family in a home with good bones and history. I hoped they would fill it with love and laughter, erasing the shadows that lingered in its corners. As word spread about my impending move, something unexpected happened. People from church started stopping by, offering help with packing or cleaning. Pastor Roberts brought boxes he'd collected from local businesses. Martha organized a small team to help sort through my belongings, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to discard. "You've got quite the support system," Alice remarked during one of her visits, as 3 women from my Bible study carefully wrapped my china in newspaper. "I do, don't I?" I said, somewhat amazed. For so long, I had felt invisible, unnoticed. Now I was surrounded by people who genuinely seemed to care about my well-being. One Saturday in early May, as I was sorting through a box of old photographs, the doorbell rang. Martha was closest and went to answer it. "Blanche," she called, her voice carrying a note of caution. "You have visitors." I looked up to see Celine standing awkwardly in my living room, a young man beside her whom I didn't recognize. "Grandma," she said softly, her eyes taking in the boxes and packing materials scattered around. "You're moving?" I nodded, setting aside the photo album I'd been organizing. "Yes, the house sold last week. I close on the 30th. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice small, almost childlike. "I found a little garden apartment not far from the church. It has a patio where I can grow some flowers." I gestured to the young man beside her. "Won't you introduce your friend?" Celine blushed slightly. "This is Noah, my boyfriend." Noah stepped forward, extending his hand. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Watson. Celine has told me a lot about you." I wondered what exactly she had told him, but his warm smile seemed genuine. I shook his hand. "Please, call me Blanche." An uncomfortable silence fell. Martha, ever perceptive, murmured something about checking on the kitchen packing and slipped away, giving us privacy. "I got into State University," Celine finally said. "I start in the fall." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "You always were a smart girl. What will you study?" "Psychology," she answered, a hint of defiance in her voice. "I want to understand people, why they do the things they do." I nodded, understanding the unspoken subtext. She was trying to make sense of her family, of Thomas, of James and Patricia, of me. "That's a worthy goal," I said simply. "Would you like some tea? I haven't packed the kettle yet." She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, please." As I moved toward the kitchen, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. How many times had I offered tea to smooth over uncomfortable moments? But this time was different. This time, I wasn't using politeness to mask fear or pain. I was simply a grandmother offering hospitality to her granddaughter and her young man. It was a small step, but an important one. The reconstruction of my life, and perhaps of our relationship, had begun. 2 years can change everything. My garden apartment had become a true home. My small patio transformed into a riot of color. Roses climbing trellises, herbs spilling from terracotta pots, and a comfortable chair where I often sat in the evenings with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky. I had found peace in my solitude, discovered strength I never knew I possessed. The woman who had stood trembling at that church pulpit 2 years ago would hardly recognize me now. The doorbell chimed, pulling me from my thoughts. I checked my watch. Right on time. Celine was nothing if not punctual, a trait she'd inherited from me, though she probably didn't realize it. "Grandma," she exclaimed as I opened the door, wrapping me in a warm hug that still surprised me. These displays of affection had come gradually over the past 2 years, each one a small miracle. "I brought sandwiches from that deli you like." "You spoil me," I smiled, ushering her inside. Celine had become a regular visitor, stopping by at least twice a month. Our relationship had been rebuilt slowly, cautiously at first, like placing one foot in front of the other on ice that might crack. But with each visit, each conversation, The ice had thickened beneath us. "How are your classes?" I asked, as we settled at my small dining table, unwrapping sandwiches and pouring iced tea. "Challenging," she admitted. "This developmental psychology course is fascinating, but the professor is brutal with grading." She took a bite of her sandwich, then added, "Noah says hi, by the way. He's sorry he couldn't come today. He's stuck in a study group." I nodded, genuinely disappointed. I had grown fond of Noah over the past year. He was kind to Celine, respectful to me, and possessed a quiet wisdom unusual in someone so young. "And how are your parents?" I asked carefully. The question still hung awkwardly between us, even after all this time. James and Patricia remained distant figures in my life, acknowledging my existence through Celine, but maintaining their own separation. Celine sighed. "The same. Dad's working too much. Mum's planning some charity gala." She hesitated, then added, "They asked about you." My heart quickened. "Oh?" "Mum wanted to know if you were coming to Thanksgiving this year." I sat down my glass, surprised. "I wasn't aware I was invited." "You weren't, not officially." Celine looked uncomfortable. "But I told them I wouldn't come if you weren't welcome." Noah backed me up. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Celine, I don't want to cause any family rifts. Not after everything." "You're not causing anything," she said firmly. "They are, with their stubbornness." I sighed, recognizing the defiant tilt of her chin, the same expression she'd worn that fateful Sunday when she'd pushed me toward the back pews. But now her defiance was on my behalf, not against me. "Your father is complicated," I said carefully. "He grew up believing in a certain image of his family. When that image was shattered, it shattered something in him too." "That doesn't excuse how he's treated you," Celine insisted. "No," I agreed, "it doesn't. But understanding isn't the same as excusing." Celine studied me for a moment. "That's what Noah says about you, that you have this incredible capacity for understanding without enabling. He says it's a rare quality." I smiled, touched by the observation. "Noah is a very perceptive young man. She also says," Celine continued, "that I'm lucky to have you as a role model, and he's right." Her voice grew quieter. "I'm so sorry for how I treated you, Grandma, for believing all those things about you without ever asking your side." "You were 17, I reminded her gently. "You believed what you were raised to believe." "But I was cruel," she insisted, her eyes filling with tears. "What I said to you that day at church, it was unforgivable." "Nothing is unforgivable, Celine. Nothing." I squeezed her hand again. "And I forgave you long ago." We finished our lunch, moving on to lighter topics. Her summer internship plans, my community garden project at church, a book we had both recently read. As she prepared to leave, Celine paused at the door. "There's something else," she said hesitantly. "Grandpa Thomas is sick. Cancer. Dad didn't want me to tell you, but I thought you should know." The news hit me with unexpected force. Despite everything Thomas had done, despite the pain he had caused, hearing of his illness stirred complex emotions. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "How is your father handling it?" "Not well. He's in denial, I think. Says Grandpa will beat it, that he's too strong to let cancer win." She hesitated. "The doctors don't agree." I nodded, understanding all too well. James had always idolized his father, had built his entire identity around being Thomas Watson's son. Losing him would be devastating. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "If there's anything I can do." Celine nodded, then left with a final hug, promising to call soon. 3 days later, my phone rang at an unusual hour. James's name appeared on the screen, the first time he had called in over 2 years. My hand trembled slightly as I answered. "James?" Mom? His voice sounded strained, exhausted. Dad's gone. He passed last night. I closed my eyes, absorbing the news. I'm so sorry, James. There's going to be a service on Friday, he continued, his voice mechanical. At West Lawn Cemetery, 2:00. I hesitated. Would you like me to come? The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible. Yes, I think I would. The service was small but dignified. Thomas had outlived many of his friends, and his quick decline had left little time for elaborate preparations. I sat in the back row, dressed simply in a navy dress, observing rather than participating. James stood stoic beside Patricia, accepting condolences with rigid composure. Celine spotted me immediately and came to sit beside me, Noah following quietly. I'm glad you came, she whispered. Dad needs you, even if he doesn't realize it yet. After the service, as people mingled at the small reception, James approached me. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. You didn't have to come, he said, his voice flat. I came for you, I replied simply. Not for him. James nodded, looking away. Celine says you're doing well, your new place. I am, I confirmed. It suits me. An uncomfortable silence fell between us. There was so much unsaid, so many wounds still unhealed. Did you ever hate him? James finally asked, his voice low. I considered the question carefully sometimes, I admitted, but mostly I pied him. He was a deeply unhappy man. James, and unhappy people often make others unhappy too. James's composure cracked slightly, his eyes glistening. I don't know how to reconcile the father I thought I knew with the man you described, with what I found in your box of evidence. You don't have to reconcile them, I said gently. Both versions were real in their own way. He could be charming, generous, even loving sometimes, and he could be cruel. People are complicated, James, even the ones we love. A single tear escaped, tracking down his cheek. I should have believed you. Yes, I said softly. You should have. He looked at me, then really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. I don't know how to fix this. Maybe we don't fix it, I suggested. Maybe we just start building something new, something honest. Patricia approached cautiously, her eyes wary but not unkind. James, the minister is leaving. He wanted to speak with you. James nodded, wiping his cheek quickly. I'll be right there. He turned back to me. Will you stay a while? Maybe we could talk more after everyone leaves. I'd like that, I said. As he walked away, I felt a strange sense of lightness. Not happiness exactly, there was still too much pain for that, but possibility. The possibility of reconciliation, of understanding, of truth. Later that evening, as I sat in my garden watching the stars emerge one by one, I thought about redemption. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, with tearful embraces and instant healing, but the quiet, gradual kind that comes with time and patience. My life had been broken and rebuilt like a mosaic made from shattered pieces. It wasn't perfect. There were still gaps, rough edges, places where the pieces didn't quite fit. But it was beautiful in its own way. And it was mine. For the first time in 72 years, I was living a life unburdened by secrets, by fear, by the exhausting work of maintaining appearances. I had found my voice, and with it, my freedom. And that was redemption enough. Now, I'm curious about you, who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen one story that will definitely surprise you.